Well, welcome to part 5. As we've been doing recently, I want to go over some things that have come to light on the discussions within the Steel Beast forum. If you haven't been reading that thread, I highly recommend that you do. There's some good information in there that won't necessarily make it into the tutorial because it may not apply to the mission editor, may just apply to the gameplay modes. And Steel Beast's development team is actively involved, so we're really getting some good information and a lot of stuff that I didn't know. What I want to talk about before we get started then is some things that Snake has mentioned. Snake is a member of the Steel Beast team, and he had a couple of interesting points this time around. Um, One of his discussion points was around the use of penalty zones, which we talked about previously, and how they like to consider them as not necessarily 100% effective zones. So not necessarily used to block the player in. Maybe you should consider using a low likelihood of the effect taking place so as to encourage some aggressive thinking or some outside the box thinking on the part of commanders. He also coupled that with a discussion that the map doesn't end at the border. So it's not like a doom zone or a quake zone where there's a hard end to the map. In Steel Beast, that doesn't happen, and as I noted last time, you can actually go off the map. And Snake's point was that there's nothing to prevent you from putting enemy units out there, so that should a commander decide to chance the penalty zone um, with a low likelihood penalty, and he decides that the risk-reward benefit is worth the risk, he may very well find that he runs into some enemy units out there that perhaps he wasn't expecting. And that capability, Snake mentioned, has been deliberately built into Steel Beasts because they don't want the edge of the map to feel like a safe zone. So that was some interesting discussion that Snake had about penalty zones and the fact that the map does not have a hard border. Um, Dark Angel mentioned a point that I thought was interesting. I noted last time that the time zone was set to the Eastern time zone, and then I changed it to account for daylight savings time. As it turns out, the time zone is initially set from the map data. So whatever the map is, it picks up the time zone from the UTM data. And you can actually see that in the map info option if you want to know what it is. But frankly, it's just as easy to look, I think, at the date and time setting. While we're talking about that, let's open that date and time dialog again. I want to go over one thing there that came to light, which I found very intriguing. Um, Snake made a mention of the fact that if you leave the hour and minute setting here for the current time at exactly 12 o'clock, the scenario will then play through and the daylight brightness will never change. If you vary it by as much as a minute or as little as a minute, so let's say you go to 11:59 or 12:01 or anything other than 12 o'clock, at that time the game engine will start to use dynamic daylight. And over a period of time, you'll actually see, for example, twilight approach or dark approach or dawn, begin to appear. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing your scenario design is if this is set at 12 o'clock, the scenario's brightness will be fixed. If it's anything other than 12 o'clock, then the brightness will vary depending on the time of day. So I found that very interesting. One other thing that came up in the discussion is the ability to use the contour line spacing choice here. You'll notice that right now it's set to 25 meters. So that may not show you enough of the terrain detail that the designer would want to see. Now this setting is not saved with the mission. It's just for use in the editor, but you also have the same setting available to you when you're playing the game. But if I set this down to 10 meters, for example, you'll notice now that you can see maybe a lot more of the very steep ridge lines and things like that that didn't show up at the 25-meter view. So definitely keep that in mind. It's a very handy setting when you're working on the map. Um, let's go and right click somewhere and go into the view mode. And this is going to put us in the world view. And I had commented earlier that the way I usually chose my sky texture was to look at it from the Windows Explorer and look at each of the image files in turn and then pick the one I liked. Snake pointed out that there's actually a much better way to do this, and that is when you're in the editor in the 3D world view, you can press Alt-S and it will bring up a dialog browser. And then you can choose one. For example, I'm going to choose Day Cloudy 4 and say Open, and you will immediately see the effect. So that's a very handy way to go through the list of available sky textures and pick the one that best suits your mission conditions. Let's hit F5 now to go back to the map view. All right, and that's going to be it for this episode. I'm going to keep it short this time because I had enough summary information that I wanted to go over that getting into any of the actual scenario design will just make this video too long for YouTube. So what we'll do is we'll pick up with the scenario editing itself in the next episode, part 6, where we'll get the Red Forces on the move. So we'll see you shortly.